Hello, friends, and welcome to Jewels of Truth. My name is Daniel Fontenot. Today, I want to discuss the claim that Catholicism makes that it is unified. Catholicism's unity in contrast to Protestantism's divisions. What I'm going to read here in this presentation is, I think, the last chapter in this book by F.D. Nichol, or Francis D. Nichol, in his book entitled Answers to Objections. If you are a Seventh-day Adventist, then this is a gold mine. Just about any question that comes up about Adventism is answered in this book, Answers to Objections. So, what I want to say also, this is, I had to retype this because I just felt like not all of it needed to be put in this presentation, so I adapted it from the book Answers to Objections. Okay, so let's begin. One of the historic differences between Catholicism and Protestantism concerns the right of the individual to interpret the Scriptures and to form one's own opinion according to the dictates of conscience. Catholicism holds that the individual, even though he may be a devout Christian, is not capable alone of understanding the Bible, that his private judgment is so faulty and erring that only confusion can result from permitting him to determine his spiritual life by what he reads in the book of God. Rome holds that the Church, and by the Church is meant the Catholic clergy in general and the Pope in particular, is the only and true interpreter of Scripture. This view naturally explains why, as a general rule, the Catholic laity are not students of the Scriptures. Neither are they encouraged to study them for themselves. The very diversity of Protestant churches provides Rome with what it believes to be an absolute demonstration of the truth of its teaching that private judgment is a dangerous heresy. For, see, it declares, what confusion and disintegration have come to Protestantism. And whenever a sharp religious dispute occurs in a Protestant denomination, Rome considers it as simply an added proof. On the editorial page of The Pilot, a leading Catholic weekly newspaper published in Boston back in the 1930s, the statement was made that, quote, "It is a chaotic world in about every field of human activity, but by the grace of God we are spared uncertainty in that sphere of life which is paramount above all others. The Catholic Church, protected by the abiding presence of the Spirit of truth, teaches at this hour the faith delivered to the apostles. She teaches not speculatively or with mere probability, but with an assurance which is altogether divine. Her credentials entitle her to the allegiance of every reasonable intelligence. The day draws nearer when the simplest of minds must perceive that their choice lies between her or nothing." Now, I'm going to break off for a moment from this chapter in Francis Nichol's book and read a portion of a passage in the Source for Bible Students, page 246, and then we'll come back to the main article. This is under the heading Infallibility and Private Judgment. Quote, "It is common with Roman Catholics to speak as if the use of private judgment and the infallibility of the Church were things opposed to each other. They are fond of contrasting the peace and certainty and assurance of him whose faith rests on the rock of an infallible church with the uncertainty of him whose belief rests only on the shifting sands of his own fallible judgment. But it must be remembered that our belief must, in the end, rest on an act of our own judgment, and can never attain any higher certainty than whatever that may be able to give us. We may talk about the right of private judgment, or the duty of private judgment, but a more important thing to insist on is the necessity of private judgment. We have the choice whether we shall exercise our private judgment in one act or in a great many, but exercise it in one way or another we must. We may either apply our private judgment separately to the different questions in controversy, such as purgatory, transubstantiation, invocation of the saints, and so forth, and come to our own conclusion on each. Or we may apply our private judgment to the question whether the Church of Rome is infallible. And if we decide that it is, take all our religious opinions thenceforward on trust from her. But it is clear that our certainty that any of these things she teaches us is right cannot be greater than whatever certainty we have that our private judgment has decided the question rightly whether we ought to submit unreservedly to her teaching. And again, that was from the source book for Bible students, page 246. So just to kind of maybe simplify things here, and in this statement that I just read, even with the Catholic who believes, okay, the Pope is right about everything, or the infallible church is right about everything, I should submit all of my judgment to her. I have no right to my private judgment. But still, in making that decision, that judgment, you are making a private judgment. No matter what you do, no matter what you do in life, you are making private judgments. You are using, in other words, you're using your own mind that God gave you to exercise. Okay? So let's go on. It was not the teaching of the Reformers that everyone's private views on religion are equally valid, but simply that there is no tribunal that God has set up in this world before which those views are to be judged. And the Catholic Church caricatures the basic idea in the Reformers' teaching by declaring that, quote, given the principle of private judgment, how can anyone argue against any conclusion, however fantastic? In other words, the essence of the Reformers' position in this matter was not that private judgment is infallible, or even good in various cases, but that the claim of the Catholic Church to the right of domination over the private judgment and beliefs of men is altogether wrong. The application of the principle of private judgment to the interpretation of Scripture was based by the Reformers on the following beliefs: that God has revealed His will to men in an infallible book, that we are promised God's Spirit to enlighten our minds, that we may discern spiritual things and may be led into all truth, that nowhere does the Bible declare that God has set up any human institution to stand between the Christian and the understanding of the Bible. It may be fairly granted that the application of these principles has permitted a certain divergence in Protestantism through the centuries, but such divergence, contrasted with the seeming unity of Rome, does not in itself provide the proof that the Protestant attitude toward the Scriptures is wrong and the Catholic one right. It is possible to maintain quite a definite measure of unity of utterance in an organization without possession of any supernatural or infallible powers. It is also possible, on the other hand, in various branches of an organization to have a considerable amount of divergence on secondary questions while maintaining a remarkable unity on vital matters. A reading of the great Reformation creeds reveals a singular measure of unity on the vital doctrines of salvation, a measure of unity, indeed, that can be explained only on the ground that the divine Spirit has exercised a manifest degree of control over the hearts and minds of all. An examination, on the other hand, of beliefs that have been held inside the circle of the Catholic Church indicates that a wide variation has been present there, despite the closely knit nature of the organization, divergencies and controversies so sharp that if equivalent ones had occurred in Protestant ranks, Catholic writers would have made capital of them. Now, on this very point, Wiley, that's J.A. Wiley, in his notable essay entitled The Papacy, observes, and this is a kind of a long quote from him, "When one man only in the world is permitted to think, and the rest are compelled to agree with him, unity should be of as easy attainment as it is worthless when attained. Yet despite the despotism of force and the despotism of ignorance, which has been employed in all ages to crush free inquiry and open discussion in the Roman Church, serious differences and furious disputes have broken out in her. When we name the Pope, we indicate the whole extent of her unity." Let me read that short sentence again. It is very profound, very simple, but there's a lot in this. When we name the Pope, we indicate the whole extent of her unity. Here she is at one, or has usually been so. On every other point she is disagreed. The theology of Rome has differed materially in different ages, so that her members have believed one set of opinions in one age and another set of opinions in another age. What was sound doctrine in the 6th century was heresy in the 12th. And what was sufficient for salvation in the 12th century is altogether insufficient for it in our day. Transubstantiation was invented in the 12th century. It was followed at a distance of 3 centuries by the sacrifice of the Mass, and that again in our day by the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin. In the 12th century, the Lombardic theology, which mingled faith and works in the justification of the sinner, was in repute. So this Lombardic theology comes from Peter Lombard, who collected the opinions of the fathers into one volume. The differences he had hoped to reconcile, he but succeeded from their proximity in making more apparent. Interesting. This had its day, and was succeeded in about 100 years after the scholastic theology. The schoolmen discarded faith and gave works alone a place in the important matter of justification. On the ruins of the scholastic divinity flourished the monastic theology. This system extolled papal indulgences, adoration of images, prayers to saints, and works of supererogation, and on these grounds rested the sinner's justification. The Reformation came, and a modified theology next became fashionable, in which the grosser errors were abandoned to suit the newly risen light. But now all these systems have given place to the theology of the Jesuits, whose system differs in several important points from all that went before it. On the head of justification, the Jesuitical theology teaches that habitual righteousness is an infused grace, but that actual righteousness consists in the merit of good works. Here are 5 theologies which have successively been in vogue in the Church of Rome. Which of these 5 systems is the orthodox one? Or are they all orthodox? But not only do we long for unity between the successive ages of the Romish Church, we long for unity among her contemporary doctors and councils. They have differed on questions of ceremonies, on questions of morals, and they have differed not less on the questions of the supremacy and infallibility. Difference of opinion has been the rule, agreement the exception. Council has contended with council. Pope has excommunicated Pope. Dominican has warred against Franciscan, and the Jesuits have carried on ceaseless and furious battles with the Benedictines and other orders. What indeed are these various orders but ingenious contrivances to allay heats and divisions which Rome could not heal, or to allow differences of opinion which she could neither prevent nor remove? What one infallible bull has upheld as sound doctrine, another infallible bull has branded as heresy. Rome has been edified with the spectacle of 2 rival vicars of Christ playing at football with the spiritual thunder, and what we find one Holy Father Nicholas commending as an assembly of men filled with the Holy Ghost, namely the Council of Basel, we find another Holy Father, Eugenius, depicting as madmen, barbarians, wild beasts, heretics, miscreants, which is a vile wretch, monsters, and a pandemonium. But there is no end of the illustrations of papal unity. The wars of the Romanists have filled history and shaken the world. The loud and discordant clatter which rose of old around Babel is but a faint type of the endless din and furious strife which at all times have raged within the modern Babel, the Church of Rome. Such is the unity which the Romish Church so often and so tauntingly contrasts with what she is pleased to term Protestant disunion. As a corporation having its head at Rome and stretching its limbs to the extremities of the earth, she is of gigantic bulk and imposing appearance. But, closely examined, she is seen to be an assemblage of heterogeneous or different materials held together simply by the compression of force. It is a coercive power from without, not an attractive influence from within, that gives her being and form. The appearance of union and compactness which she puts on at a distance is altogether owing to her organization, which is of the most perfect kind and of the most despotic character, and not to any spiritual and vivifying principle, whose influence descending from the head moves the members and results in harmony of feeling, unanimity of mind, and unity of action. It is a combination, not incorporation, union, not unity, that characterizes the Church of Rome. It is the unity of dead matter, not the unity of a living body whose several members, though performing various functions, obey one will and form one whole. It is not the spiritual and living unity promised to the Church of God, which preserves the liberty of all, and at the same time that it makes all one. It is a unity that degrades the understanding, supersedes rational inquiry, and annihilates private judgment. It leaves no room for conviction, and therefore no room for faith. It is a unity that extorts from all submission to one infallible head, that compels all to a participation in one monstrous and idolatrous rite, and that enchains the intellect of all to a mass of contradictory, absurd, and blasphemous opinions. This is the unity of Rome. Men must be free agents before it can be shown that they are voluntary agents. In like manner, the members of the church must have liberty to differ before it can be shown that they are really agreed. But Rome denies her people this liberty, and thus renders it impossible that it can ever be shown that they are united. She resolves all into absolute authority, which in no case may either be questioned or opposed. Dr. Milner, after striving hard in one of his letters, entitled The End of Controversy, letter 16, to show that all Catholics are agreed as regards the fundamental articles of Christianity, is forced to conclude with the admission that they are only so far agreed as that they all implicitly submit to the infallible teaching of the Church. At all events, says he, the Catholics, if properly interrogated, will confess their belief in one comprehensive article, namely this: I believe whatever the Holy Catholic Church believes and teaches. So then, this renowned champion of Roman Catholicism, forced to abandon all other positions as untenable, comes at last to rest the argument in behalf of his church's unity upon this: even the unreasoning and unquestioning submission of the conscience to the teaching of the Church. In point of fact, this comprehensive article, quote unquote, sums up the entire creed of the Papists. The Church inquires for him, thinks for him, reasons for him, and believes for him. Or, as it was expressed by a plain-speaking Hibernian, who, making his last speech and dying confession at the place of execution, and resolved not to expose himself to purgatory for want of not believing enough, declared, quote, that he was a Roman Catholic, and died in the communion of that church, and believed as the Catholic Church ever did, now doth believe, or ever shall believe. Unquote. Put out the eyes of men, and there will be only one opinion about color. Extinguish the understandings of men, and there will be only one opinion regarding religion. This is what Rome does. With her rod of infallibility, she touches the intellect and the conscience and benumbs them with stupor, which is stupidity. There comes thus to reign within her pale a deep stillness, broken at times by ridiculous disputes, furious quarrels, and serious differences on points termed fundamental, which remain unsettled from age to age. The famous question, for instance, touching the seat of infallibility and this profound quiescence, so like the repose of the tomb, accomplished by the waving of her mystic rod, she calls unity. And again, that was from the papacy by his article or book called The Papacy by J.A. Wiley, pages 194 to 198. The answer to the problem. The answer to the distressing problem of divergence of belief on the part of those who hold to the Bible as their one guide is not to surrender their minds to the Catholic Church, but to pray the more earnestly for divine enlightenment by the Spirit of God, till we all come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. Ephesians 4:13. Quite evidently, in Paul's day, there were some divergencies, or else there would have been no point to the statement about coming into, quote, the unity of the faith, unquote. Of course, it must not be forgotten that one of the handicaps that belong to the Protestant position is that a man who for some selfish or stubborn reason desires to hold some diverse view can do so on the declaration that he sees the matter thus and so, even though his mind may have been clearly convinced to the contrary by the scriptural evidence of God's Spirit. The Protestant view sets up no tribunal to judge the hearts of men, no confessional to probe the innermost thoughts of the soul, and thus a man's hypocrisy cannot be uncloaked. Yet, the differences of view that grow out of such a situation as this, and doubtless there are numbers of them, when we remember the willfulness of the human heart, provide no proper indictment of the Reformer's principle of private judgment in relation to the Bible. God alone can reveal hypocrisy, and we must await the day of judgment for that. We cannot agree with the conclusion of the Catholic position that says that the day draws nearer when the simplest of minds must perceive that their choice lies between her, the Roman Catholic Church, or nothing. The choice is not that of the Catholic Church or nothing. Rome offers us the Bible plus tradition, with tradition taking the precedence over the Bible, and with both interpreted by the Catholic Church. Historic Protestantism offers us the Bible alone, and as interpreted to our hearts by the Spirit of God, who will guide the believer into all truth. John 16:13. The question is really three-sided, for there are not only the Catholic and Protestant views, but also that of a large number today who have discarded both the Bible and tradition, who have faith neither in the Catholic Church's interpretation nor in the supernatural operation of the Spirit of God on the human heart and mind. This third group, known loosely as modernists, or today liberals, offer the Bible plus scientific works, with the latter given precedence over the former, and with both interpreted by human reason. And today liberals pretty much reject the Bible. This was written back in probably 1930s or 1940s. The presence of this third group today makes the religious problem much more complex than formerly, when the question was simply one between the Catholic Church and historic Protestantism. There is a new need for those who stand on the platform of the Bible and the Bible only to provide strong reasons for their stand. They are beset today not only by their traditional opponent Rome, but by a new and even more subtle one, modernism or liberalism. So, there you go. This is my answer because, and on some of these presentations, these videos, my presentations have been attacked, and Catholics like to talk about Protestantism's divisions and, as if the Catholic Church was always in unity, which that's just false. So I hope that this has been a blessing to you, and if you agree with this presentation and it has been a blessing to you, then by all means tap that like button so that it can be sent far and wide to those who are hungering for truth in these last days. And if you have any comments, then by all means place them at the bottom of this, or questions for that matter, place them at the bottom of this video. And if you haven't subscribed, we would highly encourage you to do so. We thank you for joining us here at Jewelers of Truth. We hope and pray that you will have a good day in the Lord.